Welcome everyone to the Codex Foundation Logan Book Art Center. I'm Inga Brueggemann, the Executive Director, and really thank you all for coming out this evening. We're really happy to have Alberto Blanco here, and I'm really looking forward to this talk.
I said wait for the train to come.
Yeah. And I think that's about it. There are free prints and posters. Our Codex Foundation International Biennial Book Art Fair and Symposium is coming up this February. We're all in a flurry over getting all of that going and running. But we're happy to have Alberto, and I'm going to have Peter, who is going to introduce Alberto.
But there was a quote that I wanted to quote from this book, Dawn of the Senses. I want to say something about basically how I met Alberto.
You want to sit down?
No, I can stand for a few
You
minutes.
have to talk a little louder.
Yeah, do I? Okay. Can you all hear me now? I'm talking, all right. I met Alberto in Mexico City when he was brought into a museum in which I was having a conference with the man who was the director of the museum. And and he was just, hi, I'm Alberto Blanco. And I went, oh my goodness, you're Alberto Blanco. I'd already seen this book at City Lights. I had heard of him through his friends Juvenal Acosta and John Oliver Simon, people that we know around this town. And well, Alberto, as I know him, is a transborder person. I mean, he's lived in Southern California. He may have lived up here in San Francisco, and definitely lives in Mexico City with his wife, and he raised children there. And now one of his children live here in the Bay Area. So we're blessed with the opportunity to see him from time to time. This array of books here will give you some idea of the spread of his work, including up there. And other than that, I can tell you that that his poetry is really incredibly sensitive, and by the way, well translated. Since I can't read a word of Spanish unless it translates into French and English, so there you are. It's the best I could do. Just learning about Mexico very late in my life, and as you all know, in Mexican, there's a gazillion X's in the language. I mean, every other word in Mexican is X, got an X in it. So I said, what we need is a book of X, because X's are just driving me crazy. And I said, Alberto, would you write a poem devoted to the letter X? And so he started writing these shaped poems. I didn't, every double page spread, somehow creates one form or another of an X. And what I was trying to do, the blank space, anyway, what I was trying to do with this book is encourage this group of people in Cabo del San Jose to make books and learn how to print. And so I helped them find their printing press, and I helped them buy their type, and I helped them do all this stuff, but then what were they going to do? They didn't know what to do. So I said, well, let's do a book with Alberto Blanco. And so we got these pieces. So the artist, whose name is El Macho, who made these monoprints of X's on various forms throughout the book. And, it was just an absolute blast. Do you all remember there was a big hurricane in Cabo San Lucas not that long ago, and things really went to hell in a handbasket? Mm-hmm. 9/10 or 10/10 or 8/10 of the edition was lost because of that. They had them in storage there, and they were all just... And the printing press was under mud and had to be completely redone. Anyway, this was my first real adventure with Alberto. This is my second. Oh, welcome. Alberto. Thank you for joining me.
First of all, I want to say that it's a pleasure to be back in college, to be back in Berkeley. I traveled between Mexico City and California for years and years and years, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, from San Diego to Los Angeles, San Francisco, even up to Sacramento, Chico, etc., and back to Mexico many times. I met a lot of artists here in California, poets, I had the fortune to meet almost all the living beats back then, translated a lot of them, Ginsberg, McClure, Ferlinghetti, Snyder, Philip Lamantia, and befriended them, which is something special for me because they were much older than me, much older. So when Lawrence Ferlinghetti decided to publish this book in City Lights, it was something big for me, and it still is. San Francisco for me is not another city, another place, neither Berkeley. I won't say much more than that. I feel very grateful with Peter and Susan for their generous invitation, and with Inga. Where is Inga? Yeah, I didn't know Inga before, and now I know her. She's been so friendly and so helpful. Thank you for everything, Inga. Honestly. Peter asked me for a talk about my artist books and an overview of my visual work to share with this community of artists, artists, in order to try to understand where my work comes from. First of all, I'm a Mexican poet with 36 books of poetry published in Mexico and around 20 more in different countries and languages. Among these, Dawn of the Senses, which I already said is very special for me. Before I begin the lecture, I want you to take into consideration a couple of issues. As a matter of fact, it's going to be 3 issues. I didn't write down the first one, but I'm going to spell it out. My ears are destroyed. Too much rock and roll. I'm not joking. I had a couple of bands back then, and I'm still paying taxes. So please take that into consideration if you ask me something or interrupt me or something, okay? Second, I want you to take into consideration a couple of issues. First, English is not my first language, obviously. So I will make some mistakes, for sure. Be patient with me, please. I won't say the dates in English. They are awful for me in English, the dates. I'll say the dates in Spanish if you don't mind. You will see the dates in the screen, so there's no harm, okay? The second issue has to do with the fact that I won't be talking about a number of artist books I have made with different artists along the years, like the one that Peter Koch showed you, the X book, El Libro de X, the Book of X. I will focus on my own artist books, images and words, especially a series of 30 cuadernos de escritura, writing notebooks, that comprise more than 30 years of work. Other than that, me and my wife Patty, who is here with me, brought some books for you to see, 6 or 7 multiples. Some of them can be bought, and 3 or 4 originals just for you to enjoy. And one more thing, what you were talking about and what happened in '69. You know, today is October the 2nd. For us Mexicans, it's a very special date, particularly for my generation. 2 de octubre no se olvidan. October the 2nd, 1968, there was a huge massacre in Mexico while the student movement was going on. Here in the States, people talk about the 4 Kent students that were assassinated, or the May Revolution in Paris. Some people even consider Praga, Czechoslovakia, maybe Japan. But they seldom talk about what happened in Mexico. And there was a huge turmoil in Mexico that changed the country forever. Mexico is not the same country after 68. And the movement ended on the 2nd of October of 68, 10 days before the Olympic Games. The government was terrified of what was going on, and they decided to cut the whole thing just like that. Up to this day, nobody knows how many students and people died that afternoon, that evening. Conservative numbers talk about 600, 700, 800 people assassinated that day. But there were thousands of disappeared. So the fact that today is October the 2nd, for me, is something special. I was 17 years old back then, and I must be one of the youngest guys participating in the movement. I was not the only one that young, but basically the people that were participating were older than me. And it certainly changed me forever. Having said that, I will proceed to share the work with you. We're starting with this artist book. For me, it's an artist book. It's an homage to Mallarmé, L'Écoute des Dés. It's a cube with a poem floating inside the cube. Mallarmé wrote his Golpe de Dados, his Coup de Dés, first time ever that a poet used the blank spaces, the white spaces as part of the partiture, as part of the score, as part of the reading. I decided to use the space, not only in 2 dimensions, but in 3 dimensions. This is a photograph. It's a very coarse approach, but you can have a feeling of what's going on there. There's a depth to this text. I don't know when I started drawing. Can you listen back there? Yeah, good. I'm always worried about my ears. I don't know when I started drawing. I remember drawing every day of my life, from as far back as I can remember. And I have continued to do so. This is 1960, so I was 9 years old then. But I never attended an art school. This is just to illustrate that I continued to do so. My first mentor was my grandmother, Mercedes. She was a naive painter, although my inclination towards drawing was noticeable from my earliest years. I drew everything I saw, both in the outside world and in the interior one, because for me there was no separation between everything that happened out there on the street, or what happened in the stories, songs, and tales that I read, or that were read to me, and what I dreamed. This is 59, I was 8 years old. Everything was food for my eyes. I drew every day with whatever I had within reach, at home and at school and on any surface. I drew all kinds of animals and scenes, historical, fantastic, sporting, humorous, whatever. I drew at home and at school. I drew for any reason or for no reason at all. I carefully copied the images within my reach and constantly compared them with the originals, trying to determine their resemblance. Often using an eraser more than a pencil. I copied black and white photographs from Life magazine or color photos from National Geographic and its illustrations. But it was not until well into my teens that I allowed myself to give myself over completely to my visions. Near the end of primary school in late '62, I won a national drawing competition The theme was free. I choose, and I can't remember why, the figure of an erupting volcano. Mexico is surrounded by volcanoes, Mexico City. And by the way, drawing that volcano, I discovered the composition in X, because the volcano was down here and the smoke went up like this, so it was an X composition. This first graphic triumph was rewarded with a box of 132 Prismacolor color pencils. That was the gift. A true paradise. I had a 12 colors box, and I received that 132 colors box. And if that were not enough, my father, seeing my enormous enthusiasm for colors, drawing and painting, decided at the right time to complement the prize with another wonderful gift, my first little box of watercolors, Winsor & Newton. It's this box. With my pencils and watercolors, I was able to feel what I would read years later in Paul Klee's diaries. More important than nature, its study is the attitude towards the contents of the paint box. Paul Klee's lessons were very important to me. And not only the visual ones. Klee belongs to that special family of artists who have created a visual work as well as a poetic work, and who have also been musicians. That is my case. Poetry, painting, and music. Word, images, and music. That is why I have always considered William Blake, another three-faced artist, as a guardian spirit. My father, the son of a miner, metallurgist, chemist, and later a chemical engineer, worked in a paint factory. He became an authority on paint formulation in Mexico and Latin America. That is why, from a very young age, I was lucky enough to have contact with painting on both sides, the artistic and the technical. So, here are the volcanoes again. My relationship with colors goes back a long way. I used the prized pencils and the watercolors that my father gave me with such respect and care that they lasted me for decades, believe it or not. I still have the tiny ends of many of those pencils, which became part of a collage installation I made in 2015. This is a very bad photograph, but you can see the little guys there, and there. And with what was left of the precious box of watercolors, I made 30 years later my first artist's notebook, El Cuaderno Verde. I don't know what is this doing here. It's mine, but it has nothing to do with what I have said. Maybe the shavings. Yes, that's it. It's the shavings. Okay, this is the green notebook. My first cuaderno de escritura, el cuaderno verde, where poetry and painting were joined together. Si lo que se dice no es más bello que el silencio, es mejor callar. If what you're going to say is not more beautiful than silence, then better shut up. What began with that first notebook made in 1990, by candlelight, because there was no energy back then, and during those days in Mexico, and where watercolor drawings are allied to verses, phrases, and thoughts, was the starting point of a long series of notebooks that have occupied me for more than 30 years. In about 30 notebooks, I have seen how the letter was condensed at first to constitute an aphorism. This is the second notebook, El Cuaderno Café, the brown notebook. Or even the title of each and every piece, as happens in the third one, El Cuaderno Negro. Just the title. What followed was that the words became part of the image itself. As can be seen in El Cuaderno Horizontal. From this point on, the work took a qualitative leap. The writing became the image. This can be seen clearly both in the primer cuaderno de escritura and the second writing notebook. You can see the dates over there. I won't be saying the dates. 2007. I then began to see and photograph writing everywhere. There began a process that led me to explore different alphabets and writing methods. Thus, for example, in the primer cuaderno de escritura rupestre de 2008, referred to the most archaic forms of writing that we know, although much closer in time because they are recent graphic expressions, but also with very ancient roots. The graphic system of the Australian Aborigines made its appearance in mi cuaderno puntual, redone by my wife, Patricia Reba, on the path of the ancestors. This is crystal beads. Work with the technique of the huicholes. The next notebook from 2010 explored the relationship between text and textiles. It may be the proximity with my wife, Patricia, and her work, her textile work, that led me to produce 3 notebooks where graphics are interwoven, as can be seen in el primer cuaderno de textiles. A couple of years later, in el cuaderno de textos. And 2012, finally, el tercer cuaderno de textiles. For me, it's still writing. In 2011, I wrote my primer cuaderno de caligrafías, first calligraphy notebook, which has as much to do with the Chinese calligraphy called grass style or kaoshu, also called cursive or crazy writing, as with the abstract expressionism of the New York School. Another form of writing as old as the Chinese is the one developed in Mesopotamia among the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians, the so-called cuneiform writing. 2 notebooks attest to the forms of this type of writing. El primer cuaderno de tablillas, first notebook of tablets, and the second from the same year. The inspiration for my cuaderno árabe, Arabic notebook, comes from the contiguous and adjacent regions. With both ancient and much more modern overtones, and as a tribute to the constructive universalism of the Uruguayan painter Joaquín Torres Garcia, who was greatly inspired by Mondrian, I wrote and drew my cuaderno de grafismos constructivos. In this book, I follow Le Batoir, the poem by Rimbaud. A couple of years later, and inspired by the omnipresent graffiti, I made my cuaderno de graffiti. Some more recent notebooks, such as Cuaderno de Grafismos, Cuaderno de Pictogramas, Cuaderno de Quipus. This is the writing system of the Incas. Cuaderno Maya. The original is here. You can take a look at this notebook. And the Cuaderno de Escritura Blanca, which is also here, dedicated to Mark Tobey, made during the pandemic. All these notebooks have been expanding the territory explored. As for figure drawing, I draw using only pencil 2 alphabets in the form of 2 códices or codex. Abecedario de mayúsculas and abecedario de minúsculas. This one was very much more detailed, but either I lost the notebook or someone stole it, and I didn't like the feeling. So I decided to draw it again immediately, and I had to work fast because I didn't want to forget the images. The series of notebooks is rounded off with the first and second and third cuadernos postales. These cuadernos postales, as you can see, used as ground, as base, letters or whatever I have received through the years. Back then, people used to write. Back then, there were even letters, and just because I decided, sometimes I just wanted to intervene the envelopes or whatever. Sometimes what happens in the image is something that has to do with a post stamp, like Freud in that case. Sometimes it's something different. This is a letter from Ludwig Seller, who was a very great collage artist living back then in Toronto. That's a letter from W.S. Merwin, the translator of the parakeets that you printed, Jonathan. Those palms have to do with his palm garden in Hawaii, in haiku. So as you can see, starting since my first writing notebook from 2007, I have explored very diverse forms of writing and alphabets in my artist notebooks. Each writing notebook contains dozens of images, and there are those with no more than 30 up to those with more than 100 and some almost 200 original works. To date, I have made a total of 30 writing notebooks containing around 1800 originales, 1800 originals. But there are other works, true artist books, which perhaps do not have anything to do with the different forms of writing and alphabets, but with poetry, such as Bella, which is a children's book, unpublished, illustrated with gouache, or a zodiac with oil images on paper, and 12 poems that allude to the astrological houses, as well as my wife Patty's 12 silk thread and found coins constellations. The digital graphics of Los Siete Pescados Capitales, the 7 capital fishes or sins or fins, a book of maps illustrating a 64-verse poem of the same title, Los Libros Dados, the image with you saw at the very beginning, an object book in the form of a double sculpture as a tribute to Mallarmé Un Coup d'Idée from 1992. The Codex Antelucanus, a digital codex made with my daughter Dana from fragments of poems that I rescued from sleep and that were collected over decades. Each little red circle you see here is inscribed with a tiny fragment of a poem rescued from dream. It's all written while I sleep, but awake in sleep, if that makes sense.
How big is that? How big is that? How large is that?
How long?
Yeah.
6 metros that would be like mass. Uh-huh. But we also did a small version, like a codex. But those sold out, and there are no more. I don't even have one. I wish. I also draw a very extensive series of pequeñas historias de misterio ilustradas para ser escritas por el espectador. Sorry for the long title. Little illustrated mystery stories to be written by the viewer. El libro de los pájaros. This book of birds not only became an origami flock made by my son Andres, but it gave rise to an intervened book. The original edition of the book of poems that bears this name, published in Oaxaca by Francisco Toledo, became an extensive collage. It's here also, the original. But the inspiration of birds did not stop there. It is not by chance that birds have always fascinated us. Their joyful freedom, their song, their flight. After learning to cut with a laser machine, I produced 2 books of pájaros de alambre, wirebirds, which in turn gave rise to a series of small metal sculptures. Other artists' books have moved into different areas. A good example of this is La Autobiografía No Autorizada, an authorized autobiography, which, by the way, has to do with Berkeley. Believe it or not. Maybe some of you met or knew Jack Foley. You did, of course, you did. He was doing a series of autobiographies, of small autobiographies by a lot of different writers. And he asked me to write one. And it took me forever to write something. By the time I was sort of out there, forget it, that was history. So I just continued and finished my narrative, and I bind the book on both ends. So basically that's it. Another strange book is Todas las hojas son iguales. All the pages are the same. This one is a big one. It has more than 200 variations of the same page. As a kind of counterpoint, I made El Anillo Invisible, the invisible ring, a fairy tale without text, made with collage of engravings where the invisible, so to speak, ring appears in all kinds of spaces and landscapes. On the other hand, there is a whole series of works made with recycled paper that began with Le Salon de Refusés, made from the typewritten sheets of the discarded versions of the poems from my first books. Back then, we used a mechanic writing machine, that machine. This is a work that predates computers, but I continue to recycle paper and still do to this day, and make all kinds of figures and masks. Like in this case, Las Máscaras del Lenguaje. There's a poem with that title, Las Máscaras del Lenguaje, the masks of language. There are also portfolios with poems and visual works, such as A la luz de la noche, which is here, which contains 5 poems and 5 cincographs. Those are graphic works made on plates of zinc out of original collages. La Fauna Maravillada, I'm sorry that I don't have a good photograph of this one, because the work is very detailed. a poem accompanied by 4 decalcomanias. I don't know, how do you say that in English? Decalcomanias?
Yeah, well, that's close enough. I wouldn't know how.
I don't know.
Decalcomania.
Decalcomania. That's it. That's the technique that Oscar Dominguez developed. And I'm getting tired of doing this in English, and so my pronunciation is getting sloppy. Triptychos. Triptychs? Okay. This is one of those triptychs. Las piedras del tiempo, las piedras del espacio. There would have to be another whole talk about the many joint works I have done with my wife, Pat, and her beautiful textiles. These are here, including 10 children's books illustrated by her. However, it was not in the cuadernos that the alliance between poetry and image first took place. Between 1977 and 1979, and using my old Smith Corona typewriter, I set out to draw with letters a series of visual poems. I'm going to go back. This is another work by Patty made with silk thread, and a poem about las estaciones, the seasons. So, back to the mecanografías. 30 years later, I managed to convert into 12 lithographs to make a portfolio entitled Mecanografías. We have a copy there, Mecanografías. This work is pretty close to the Brazilian concrete poetry. This is by Decio Pignatari, that one is by myself. And with other works that I was not familiar with at the time, such as those of the Frenchman Henri Chopin and those of the Mexican Ulises Carrion. 2 pioneer artists in the world of artist books. Ulises Carrion in Amsterdam, Mexican. There are some poets who have made writing itself the basis of their visual work, like Henri Michaud. I feel close to the work of Henri Michaud, as you can see in my cuaderno de pictogramas. And the Belgian d'Autremont. I feel close to them both. On the painting side, I have affinities with many surrealists, like André Masson, and with artists who are essential to me, like Paul Klee. This is Patty's version of some of my alphabet works. And the abstract expressionist Mark Tobin, which I have already mentioned. Paul Klee said that at their core, writing and drawing were exactly the same thing. And we should remember here that the verbs to write and to draw were one and the same word for the Greeks. But if for the Greeks writing and drawing were the same thing, how much more rightly should we not point out the same for many other traditions? In the pre-Hispanic Mesoamerican tradition, there was only one word to refer to poets and painters: tlacuilo. As a modern tlacuilo, I have explored many traditions because the forms are endless and my curiosity is big. This year, I have been working on an old book inspired by the writings of the Berber Desert, a Tifinagh notebook, a book of runes inspired by the Vikings and Nordic Futhark, the runic alphabet, a Cuba notebook based on the textile culture from Central Africa, Congo, former Zaire, and a Persian notebook. To speak of the rich traditions of the East, where calligraphy of the Islam stands out, would merit a separate lecture. The same can be said of the masterpieces of Japanese and Chinese calligraphers, among whom are many of their greatest poets, such as Wang Wei, for whom I feel a very special admiration. My father never tired of telling me, "You should be known as the poet of painters and the painter of poets." My poor father, he really believed that. Wang Wei is one of the poets that led me to study the Chinese language, until I was able to translate some of them. To do so, I took a master's degree in Oriental Studies at el Colegio de México. In addition to speaking, reading, and writing the very difficult Chinese language, I learned something about calligraphy. This is Wang Wei's monastery. This is my monastery with the Calcomania. So I made a series of drawings with Chinese calligraphy strokes. During those same years, I did metal engraving at the Molino de Santo Domingo, a unique center for the graphic arts in Mexico. This practice, halfway between chemistry laboratories and the painter's studio, was very stimulating for me. And here I must confess that I am a chemist before the master's in the Oriental Studies. In high school, I participated in a national contest of chemistry, and I won with a very ingenious work designed to produce the basic pigments from mixtures of transparent solutions. After the experience in the engraving workshop, and having seen and understood the difficulties and the great possibilities of this medium, I made collages to illustrate La Luciérnaga, the Firefly, an anthology of Mexican poetry for children in the style of Max Ernst, the surrealist with whom I feel close. I don't think I would have been able to make these collages out of images of 19th century prints if I hadn't had the previous experience of printmaking. But once I got into this way of working, I decided to make an illustrated book with collages to tell and describe the history and practice of collage. Un año de bondad, a year of kindness. It was published in 1989 with 54 collages. Each of the images, this is interesting, each of the images in the book illustrates a quote about the history of collage. It is also a tribute to Max Ernst. The book was very successful. The first edition sold out in 3 months, and to this day, something that I find utterly incomprehensible, no one has dared to make a second edition. The second part of the project, El Sueño de Euclides, also composed of 54 pieces, rounds out the work. Both books, which are actually one, are accompanied by a literary collage, which is an essay made out from the 108 quotations on the history and practice of collage. So we are talking here about a cubed collage and an implementation of the technique of collage in literature. And just as I cannot say exactly when I started drawing, I also do not know when I started making collages. I do know, however, that when I made my first collages as a child, I was very far from knowing this word. When Patty and I got married in 1973, we were going to turn 52 this year. Instead of a honeymoon, because there was no money for such luxuries, we devoted ourselves to making collage together each and every evening after work. But the oldest collages I have are from before that, from 1967. And an example of this is one of the collages I made when I was 16 years old. Much later, I discovered a collage by Bob Rauschenberg, that one, whom I did not even know by name in 1967, made in 1970, 3 years later. The similarities still seem astonishing to me. Both collages reflect the dense chaos and apocalyptic atmosphere of the 60s. And here it is worth clarifying that just as it happened with Rauschenberg, it has happened to me with many other artists whose work I did not know when I was making my pieces. Collage as a basic principle of human creativity served Patty and me much better than years of therapy and analysis. Perhaps for reasons like this, Max Ernst used to say that collage is an instrument capable of recording the precise number of possibilities that the human being has of being happy at any moment. If you want to take a look to a lot of collage work, you can go to this address, this link, Alberto Blanco collage.com. It's a website. I worked a lot doing that work site during the pandemics with a wonderful designer, Shannon Perth, who lives in Thailand, and my son Andres helped me with music I had recorded many years before, lo-fi in cassettes, and he rescued those recordings and are included in at the beginning of the chapters. The website has 36 chapters. So at the very beginning of each chapter, you will find a circle with an image. If you click there, you will listen to the music of this chapter. I'm almost finished, I promise. To be happy, that was what Max Ernst was saying, we better recognize that we're not really the owners or creators of anything. If you want to make an apple pie from scratch, Carl Sagan said, we are going to have to invent the entire universe. It's not that easy. With these ideas and words, I presented my retrospective exhibition, Collage, 2015 at the CECUT, and 4 years earlier, in 2011, a comprehensive retrospective of my visual poetry and artist books. I guess I'm gonna cut it here because it's getting late. I'm getting tired, and you must be exhausted. We don't lose anything if I don't continue. But anyway, I'm just gonna show the images and I'm gonna shut up. Okay? I've made collages out of everything or anything. Trash, labels, clippings, discarded images, boxes, old newspapers, whatever. As well as invitations and wrapping paper. But I have also used the papers that serve as supports for the different glues I use. From this waste, I've developed a relief technique that I have called reliage. Because there's relief. And I'm always surprised with the images that those papers offer me. Sometimes they remind me of Tamayo somehow. Once a very close and good friend of mine asked me, listen, Beto, that's a nickname that some people use with me. I want to know the truth. How come you can do so much work? I feel insulted. I have a lot of trouble doing a little work, and I see the way you work, and I can't stand it. Tell me the truth. What's the secret? And I said, you're not going to like it, Fernando. You're not going to like it, so let us forget about your question. No, I'm serious. I want to know. You're asking for it, okay? The thing is, Fernando, is that you do so much stuff and so much things that you don't have time to do anything. And since I don't do anything, I have a lot of time to do a lot of stuff and a lot of things. And he saw me very seriously. He said, I feel more insulted than before. But it's true. Oh, this is something else. This is books I've written about these poems. And finally, Ut Pictura Poesis, por la pintura a la poesía. Thank you very much for sharing this.